one day the sun would shine on us again. That one day the sun would look down and seem dignified to return to us again.
All right, so I think we're ready to begin. Thank you everyone for coming today and weathering the storm to be here. It was a very fun start to the day and it definitely woke me up, so here we are. My name is again Silas Soteniel Rodrigues Pinto. I am the son of Belmira Vega Rodrigues and Alceu Pinto from the Cape Verdean Islands of West Africa, and been here in the United States since 1989, living in Providence since 1991. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here, working with this fantastic human being whom I've been in close contact for a couple of decades. So we're all tripping and stumbling in this work. We're going to start. It's not about me right now. This is about our wonderful panel. And we'll give them an opportunity to speak a little bit about their work. And then, as you probably remember from the structure, we have a couple of questions to get the conversation going. And we'll start with Dr. Barnaby Evans.
Good morning, everybody. So pleased to be here. Independent of me, we're just going to run through some pictures, but this was the Cove as it was for millennia before it was entirely destroyed by the establishment of Providence. See this, we've been working together since 1995, 1994? No, it was 1998. Yeah, a little later than 1998. So Waterfire is a piece that I hope those of you who are here tomorrow evening will come take a look at. I first started it 29 years ago, and about 4 years into that, Silas discovered Silas, and he's been one of our co-presenters for many years. Waterfire is a very simple idea. We had completely just covered over the river. We tried to make it a point of pride, calling it the widest bridge in the world, but it was covered over because the river had been destroyed. It was so polluted and so mismanaged that they simply buried it. And in 1992, they started to daylight the river and bring the original river, which was why the indigenous tribes here found this to be an important meeting place and a shared resource. And they uncovered the river, but they just left it at that. And I realized that you needed to make people realize that we had a new resource and invite everyone downtown. And that's what Waterfire was. This is, what we did to the Cove. And Waterfire is an effort to really make a radical statement that we create the art. There's no actors really. It's everyone who shows up. And then we celebrate all the different communities in the city that come together. So I hope you'll come Saturday. This Saturday is the annual night we do when we celebrate the 14th anniversary of the final fish ladder, so that the fish could return to the river, something that the indigenous community had celebrated every April. And you'll see 100 fish swimming on the river in among the fires. And this is the wonderful Providence river state before the park came in. So with that.
All right, thank you so much. And next we have Don King, another person that I have had the pleasure of working with for many moons, supporting his groundbreaking sound session parade many years ago. I go all the way back into my high school years, and so we won't date that. But go ahead and pass it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's good to see you, Silas. It's good to see everyone here on the panel, Helen, Barnaby. And I just want to acknowledge and thank Chief Raymond Two Hawks for inviting me to sit on this panel. It's really an honor. I guess one of the things I'd like to kind of open up today as our conversation, and even picking up on the fact that Barnaby used the word, he opened up the river to an extent, and it's interesting because that's part of what I've been thinking about in terms of our work and looking at myself as a storyteller. And I don't always use that word because I'm a non-traditional storyteller. I tell stories through theater, through parades, through design. And one of the most important things that in my career, in my professional career, that I feel like I ever did was in inviting Ray and indigenous leadership to lead the first annual parade for Providence Sound Session. And that impulse came from wanting to tell the story of place. And I think that that's really important, and I think that continues to be a challenge that the city of Providence and the state of Rhode Island has, is in its ability to really unearth and tell the story of place of Providence and of Rhode Island in totality. And so you have people, you have cultures who are hiding in plain sight, as Ray says, you know, that are walking in two worlds, and that there really aren't the kinds of institutions that should be in place to put forward the fact that, you know, you're walking down streets, you're going to cities that are named for the people that first inhabited these places, the indigenous people. So part of my work, the work that I do with PCEI, is to kind of uncover stories, to give a face to the faceless in the city that I was born and raised in. Thank you.
And speaking of untold stories, we pass it over to Helen Duke, who's been leading the Juneteenth Festival. That was the first time we had an opportunity to really meet when we brought the Cape Verdean Batuque to the stage. And that is a very ill-told story, especially here in the city of Providence and the larger Rhode Island. And we have two very impactful events, revolutionary events that have happened over the years, and I think the Juneteenth Festival is very much catching up to you guys very quickly. So I'll pass it over to Helen. Tell us a little bit about the work you do.
Right, thank you everybody for having me here today. Thank you. That was beautiful. Just turn it down a little bit. We can do some spoken word up here. I was the first female rapper in Rhode Island, so we can bring something to this. So, thank you. Thank you, Chief. So I am a native of Rhode Island. I am also indigenous. I'm Meshanticut, indigenous woman, and I'm also African American. So 5 years ago, if I could just be really brief, how Juneteenth came about here is we normally would have Emancipation Day, which was the African American celebration that was held annually. 2 years we went without it, so a group of us got together and we were like, hey, let's do something to recognize our culture. And Juneteenth came about, so we started in 2019, and here we are in 2023 with one of the largest Black celebrations. But that doesn't mean Juneteenth is a Black celebration. We are celebrating the emancipation of African slaves, and through that we commemorate, we educate. But one of the things that Don had said about telling a story, I also am a playwright. I like to tell stories because stories live with you. Someone can read something and walk away, but if you see it and you visualize it and you become a part of it, you won't forget it. So I wanted to make sure that Juneteenth in itself wasn't just about a celebration. African Americans have paved the way for so many things here in this country, and I want to make sure we recognize that. And so telling our story, I want to make sure we tell our story, because it's been normalized for other cultures to tell our stories in the way they want. But I want to make sure with the rich history we have here with Brown University, Slaters, the DeWolfs, that our story here is told, especially on the east side of Providence. We also have walking tours. I won't get into all that because I guess that'll come down with some of the questions, but I am excited to be here and to be able to share what we do and why we do what we do. Thank you.
Please, round of applause for Professor. We'll start with some questions to just open up conversation. Of course, you can take it to wherever you need to. But in this cultural placemaking framework that we're thinking about, we're curious about your thoughts, your understanding, the kinds of work that you have done in this framework of cultural placemaking. What does it mean to you, and how has it manifested in your work? We can start with Mr. King since we started with Mr. Evans.
Ask the last part.
How it's manifested in your work.
Again, how it's manifested in my work is that, in particular in Rhode Island, is through the grace of Chief Two Hawks, who has like not let me get away, you know, and has pulled me in, you know, every step. If I'm living in Austin, if I'm living in, you know, Portland, Oregon, on the West Coast, Chief has kept me plugged in all along. But it's really my commitment, again, to, we've done some real interesting projects that have a long life, you know. Chief, we talk about 300 years, you know, that's our plan. And so we have the makings of a lot of different initiatives that will help towards creating cultural placemaking. So, for example, Helen and I were just talking about the fact that, you know, I think it's important that any neighborhoods that I grew up in in Wiggins Village and Chad Brown and on the east side, so I can claim both sides of town. And I feel like, you know, I've gone to other cities, gone to Oakland, and you can't walk into a certain part of Brooklyn and not know who lived there. You see a big statue of Bethune-Cookman or of Marcus Garvey, and I think that those same things should happen, especially when you see all of the gentrification that's happening in the city of Providence in particular. You know, you can erase a people, you know, and some of the work that I did in Austin, Texas, a woman, good friend of mine, she came up with the term, we have been erased but not displaced. And so we have been displaced but not erased, I'm sorry. We have been displaced but not erased, let me correct that. And so that's the whole idea, is trying to make sure that there is no erasure of the culture and the contributions that those who came before us did, you know. I got blood, you know, I laid my blood down for this city, and my mother did. And she was involved politically and actively in schools and things like that. And those stories need to continue to live on. And so I'm committed to doing that kind of work. I hope that answered your question.
Oh, absolutely. You know, and also, just your thought, if you were to provide a definition to us, because we're trying to get that from all of our panelists throughout this weekend, your definition of cultural placemaking.
My definition of cultural placemaking starts with storytelling, right? It starts with honoring the story of a place. That, for me, is what cultural placemaking is. It has to be rooted in acknowledging the layers upon layers upon layers of history in a place. And I think when you give honor to those things, you know, one of the things that we did was, I always say that before land acknowledgements, we were doing that. Like when I talked about when we brought Ray and we wanted to have the local indigenous community lead that parade, that first sound session parade. That was not just us giving mouth, you know, words to land, but it was actually putting them in the front with the dignitaries, with the mayor, with the governor, with the head of city council. And so placemaking, and that was me trying to tell the story of this place, right? So.
Absolutely, thank you so much. And thank you for the comment on erasure, or at least attempted erasure. Because despite all of the efforts, we just happen to still be here. Thank you for that.
So I can add on to what Don said, and I agree with everything he said, especially about placemaking. So in these public spaces that we all are a part of, we need to make sure that culture is a part of the design, part of the planning, and also the development. So when you go to these places, you know that this diverse place is going to be represented, meaning the cultures that are within this city or this town. And as he said about starting off with the parade, we want to make sure also with Juneteenth, whether it's Black History Month and having a month-long exhibit, or it's the walking tours, making sure that when people are in Rhode Island or they come to Rhode Island, they know that this part of the culture can be, they can learn more about the African American history as well as the indigenous, because we're tied to the hip. So not only will Juneteenth speak about the African American experience, we will also speak about the indigenous experience here.
We remember places really by the stories. I mean, I've enjoyed the theater you were producing in Providence for years, and many of them were deeply moving stories about individuals but placed in context. And otherwise, the place, I mean, the natural forms of the place, I think, are equally invaluable to all of us. But it's those stories and that you know, just as the river recovered, 20 years ago, or 19 years ago, we did a big piece with Laura Montero talking about how this river and this harbor was directly connected to the slave trade. And we spent a whole night at Waterfire, and people said, "Why are you doing this at Waterfire?" And I said, "Well, this is a history you have to acknowledge." This was, we started with a series of libations and dances from cultures all over Africa, and then went to the historic houses, which are part of the historic housing tour, and talked about the deeper connections of these still standing structures there. And without these stories, we're not anchored. At the same time, there are other stories. Providence was declared to be a sanctuary city for the whole world in Roger Williams's charter. Whether we've lived up to that is another thing we have to examine with some attention and care. But that legacy is remarkable, and when I first came here from Oakland, actually, which is where I grew up, I was amazed at three things actually. The diversity of the city, but how you really had to look to find it. There were vital neighborhoods all over the place. Downtown was pretty much deserted when I came here. Bert Krenke used to talk with you about how you could bowl on the streets of downtown. But there were these vital neighborhoods, but I would go to these festivals and I would not see many other people from outside that community. And you need to, if you're going to be a sanctuary city where you've invited people from around the world, you've got to make a place where absolutely everyone feels welcome. So Waterfire's first goal was to take a place, make all of those who attend the actors in it, and then celebrate the diversity of the community by whom we work with, such as Zealous and different community groups, Lyra and things like that, but also through the music. And when art is behind a locked door in a fancy building, you can claim it's open to everyone, but why is there this big locked door on the front? You gotta do something really active to engage people so that everyone feels they are.
So to shift a little bit into the tourism context itself, so we can create these events, and of course you're here because your event has drawn thousands. And so this community engagement piece and how we can draw the community into these storytelling opportunities. We're wondering about best practices that you have implemented in your own practice so that we can learn from when we are trying to do these kinds of events. How do we bring people to the table? How do we get people to come out from behind the locked doors? How do we get folks onto the streets? And we're very curious to learn about your techniques and best practices. I can start with you.
Well, I study people, and this is something I do, so I'm not educated in it. However, I try to present things that will move people because I look at it through my own eyes. What moves me? So when I know that it's moving to me, because I take myself from, per se, let's just say writing, I take myself from the writer to the reader. And if that story can make me cry and it can move me, I know it can move someone else. I literally separate myself. So in doing these events, I say, what do we need to do to bring the people who need to be represented here out, and also make it a unified event so that anyone can feel welcomed. And that's the perspective I start off with. However, culturally, most cultures stay within their own sectors. So sometimes we have a large expectation of this unified event or whatever, but most of the time cultures stick together. So it's just a matter of making people feel inclusive. So it's always, Juneteenth is an American holiday. Are you an American? Okay, then you're invited. We're going to tell the stories of Africans, the African struggles, the accomplishments, all those things here, but you're invited because you're an American, just as you celebrate 4th of July and in these other holidays here in Rhode Island. You should come out to this one because honestly, the stories and what Juneteenth is about, it's the American story. So that's what I lead off with, that's what I end with, and we just push forward every year.
Yeah, thank you. And if I could just add on to that, well, I'm sorry, if I could, I'm like jumping out. I want to push us back for a second though, because one of the things, this is not our first rodeo in terms of, 2 years ago we were asked to facilitate a panel for the city of Providence around cultural tourism. And, Ray and I talked about the fact that you have a lot of cultural tourism events that are successful in this city and state that are not given the same kind of attention that some of the other events have, because this city and state has a problem kind of telling its story, right? And we all know what it went through with the people they hired from New York to do that story, to run those campaigns. But you don't have people who are indigenous to this city, who are born and raised, who are sitting at the table either creating the media, creating the imagery, or at least consulting and adding voices to say, well, what about this part? So I would see a lot of campaigns come out of Providence and Rhode Island. I'd be like, I didn't see me. I never saw my story, where I grew up being, they did beautiful aerial shots, and I'm watching this video and people are like, oh, this is great. And I'm like, that don't look like the Providence that I know. And I think that that's one part of when you talk about engagement, right? One of the ways in which we were really able to launch Providence Sound Session the year after we did the first year is because I happened to be networked and connected with people who were able to get me in to have a meeting with the editorial staff at the Providence Journal, right? That year, we got the spread, the opening page in the art section. And that kind of really launched us. And how do we, what I'm always trying to figure out is that there's things like Day Trip, there's the Cape Verdean Festival. Those events do well without the city's support, right? But I would say that in terms of how we brand the city and state, that those things would enhance and tell another part of the story. Ray and I would also talk about how Ray goes all over the country, and when he tells people about the indigenous community in Rhode Island and New England, they're always shocked. They don't have a sense of that story. And so part of what I think is really important is how do we lobby to make sure that the story of that, what we say is we're the stewards of trying to change the way the story of Rhode Island is told and sold, right? To make it more inclusive of everybody. And I think that will actually enhance the way in which Rhode Island's tourism campaigns are being told and sold.
I think one of the interesting things, and this is true of Helen and Don as well, is that all, I deeply agree with this one, we're all sort of catalysts. Our antennae are out to help tell these broader stories, but it's not Don's personal story. It's Juneteenth, you were just talking about, this really can apply the sense of liberation and truth and honesty and looking at the real history. It applies to everybody and all the communities. And so at Waterfire, we're trying to create a forum where that can happen. And I think one of the barriers, I'm going to get to tourism in a sec, one of the barriers is it's language, but it's culture, it's expectation, it's feeling whether you're welcomed or not. One of the more gratifying interactions I have about Waterfire is I often hear from single mothers who had kids in the family. They could bring their own food, the food from their culture to Waterfire. It didn't cost a dime. They knew it was totally free. There are no reserved seats. There are no VIP tickets. There are no special seating. You can come early and get the best seat in the house. And they used to come every weekend for Waterfire with their kids because it cost them nothing, and they could make food of their own culture and even recommend music from their own culture. that's important. We need those spaces. Tourism, I worry a little bit about tourism. You know, I don't know what the motivations are of the tourists who come. And I think we need to offer a really broad range of things for people to attend to, but they're often very focused on what they're looking for, and a lot of what is marketed out there is, you know, not constructive. It tends to be escapist. It's pretty rare for tourists who want to come and learn something new. I'm frustrated by that. Our approach is to throw a whole bunch of things at them. So they might come for Waterfire because they heard it's an interesting event, but they didn't expect to have the whole evening talking about the history of slavery in Rhode Island. If I told them the whole evening was going to be about the history of slavery, I don't know if they would have showed up. So we've talked about this a lot. We're always speaking to the choir. You know, so we have to figure out how to specifically reach those people who aren't going to choose to come to our events. And we do it by throwing a whole diversity of things all over the place, and hopefully they'll pick up on something. But I think that's an inherent problem with the tourism market itself.
Well, if I can really speak to that really quick. So my husband was on a flight, and he was reading one of the magazines on the flight, and in the magazine was Waterfire. And the person next to him, you know, they started conversing about Waterfire. And, oh, yeah, I heard about that. Oh, I want to come to that. Oh, that's wonderful. Even my aunt from Connecticut, she's like, oh, yeah, what time is Waterfire? I said, you know, go on Waterfire's website, and they'll let you know what days they're having Waterfire, and come out. But you don't see that in a magazine of sound session. You don't see that in a magazine for Juneteenth. So again, marketing is a huge piece that draws people. So it makes people feel like these things are important. So I need to be there. You go and nothing against that. And you watch people on the gondolas and then the music, and then, you know, you see the fire. But when people read and they see that other people are interested in that, that's what draws them. You know, so we need to be able to make sure that the media, like Don says, he got that front page or the whole page on the art section. We need that as well, so that people can feel like they're invited. When we don't get that, they don't feel invited. Oh, that's a black thing. Like, don't do that. Not unless.
Very important.
Yeah, exactly. However, if it's here and it's inviting, people will come.
You know, I just want to say one thing about marketing. We have never marketed Waterfire, not once. And there were two reasons for that. First of all, it was already too crowded, and we don't charge admission, so more people just cost us more money. But we also wanted people to come because they sought it out and chose to come, so that there was a certain commitment to the event. Now, that's not to say that it's not used by people who make money on Waterfire. The gondolas are not part of Waterfire, so and they charge to go in the gondolas, parking lots, hotels, restaurants. We never market Waterfire. We want you to have heard about it and chosen to come share your presence with us. But it's true, it captures people in a way, and then they'll come to Waterfire, and now we can, on the stage, we're going to have the Grupo Ondas there this Saturday. We're going to have Two Hawks will be doing a piece, and we'll be doing a prayer to welcome the herring back on the river. So they'll find these stories, but it's very hard, you know, it's very hard to get them to go to something that they don't know what is.
And I think just bringing it back to the title, if I understand, of this panel, right? It's the tourism infrastructure, and I think that's some of what we're all talking about. You know, Barnaby, you talked about when you first came here, you recognized that there was a lot of cultural diversity, but it was in silos, in pockets, right? And that there still has yet to be something Well, there are things, right? But you're still not seeing the face of all of that. You know, this place is as culturally diverse as any city I've ever lived in or any travel. But you don't really get that on the surface. And I think that that's the challenge that the people in charge of tourism in the city and in the state should really be thinking about is how can you change that? How can you enhance and bring people out of the shadows, you know, is one of the things that I think is really important in terms of engagement.
So I know one of the things that the City of Providence has done is a very tiny step, creating a department that I now direct, which is the Department for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I also see in the audience Mr. Tomas Avila, who's also directing this similar work at the state level in the Division for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So since we're talking about infrastructure, and government has a lot to do with making sure that some of those things are in place, I'm curious about maybe speaking to us and other folks who are not here from the city side, like what do you see as the roles? Where can we play a part, either in partnership or things that you think should be our direct responsibility in making sure that we create that piece? Because that panel was run by Arts, Culture, and Tourism, a department out of the City of Providence. Now DEEP and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is involved in the conversation. Where do you see us fitting in, and what do you call to action from government members and other people like ourselves that are trying to do this work, but now from other side?
Well, I'll speak, if that's okay.
Don't hold back any punches, please. We welcome vicious attacks.
Well, there are staple events and staple things that happen within Rhode Island every year. You know, Waterfire has its time frame, you know, its season. You know, there was Sound Session, which wish it would come back. You know, we have Juneteenth, we have the Cape Verdean Fest. I believe the city should pull some ads on TV and highlight these events that create the diversity, that creates the arts and tourism that comes here. We have people coming from Maryland, New York, Connecticut, Boston to Juneteenth, and now they're gonna come even further because we see the trajectory of Juneteenth and what it means to people, the draw. So I believe that's one way the city and even the state can be a part of making sure that we are highlighted and marketed and promoted to a larger audience. And that means that if this event gets the stamp of approval by the city and by the state, then people are more likely to come out. They say, oh, well, I need to be here. Oh, I didn't even know. You know, because not everyone's on social media. We don't pull ads on TV. Well, I don't. Not yet. So those who just watch TV, they wouldn't know. We're not on the radio like we should be. So that's just an idea that I think that we can get some type of support from the city and state.
Okay. And it's always a double-edged sword, right? Because on the government side, like, we're not the ones sanctioning or approving a particular event. So how do we get to the table as collaborators, making sure that we are doing our part, you're doing your part, but not necessarily stamping the event? Because that's the part that's always challenging. I've been on the community side for many years, and then just stepping into this role now for a little bit over a year. Curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's less about stamping an event, right? But it goes back to the core of what we're talking about, right? It's telling the story, right? How do you tell the story of place, right? And these events that we're talking about that are not being highlighted it's a gross misrepresentation of what's happening in the city, right? So it's an opportunity, and I think it should be looked at less as, oh, we're giving a stamp for approval of this event. But this is a part of the culture and of the people who reside in our city, and we need to tell their story. We need to make them feel and recognize their contributions as a community. So I think if it's looked at from that perspective, is are we telling a correct story about the city and state, right? If not, how can we correct our story? How can we enhance it and be more dimensional in how we sell and celebrate Rhode Island? Because it's not just Newport and Sailboat. The Newport and Sailboats are great, sorry. Sorry, they're great, but like, you know, there are so many other rich stories here and so many so much more culture to be told in this wonderful city and state. And I think there's an opportunity, which is what I think Helen was saying also.
Right, and I agree, not the stance. So you know when a network puts on a paid program, but they say, we didn't pay for this. I mean, it's a paid program, you know. So what you're watching, just know that we didn't. This is not us, but this is on our network, something like that. So at least, you know, this is what's happening in our city. This is what's happening in our state.
And it's an opportunity. I want to make sure that my perspective, where I'm coming from, is positive, is optimistic. I'm saying there's an opportunity to tell more stories, you know, and there are people, resources around that can help you tell those stories, you know, if you're asking as a representative of the city and state.
No, absolutely. And this is what I wanted to make very clear, is that we, the city, the state, we're a little behind. You know, this process, it's relatively new. We're talking about, for Providence, 386 years behind. Our department was not in session, and so we want to make sure that we don't just come in and say, I think we know how to do this, but to really be a collaborator, to really be part of the conversation. I think that's what we've been trying to do with the DEI Collaborative that Ray Watson is a part of, that we are involved in these kinds of events to make sure that whatever it is that we're doing to promote, that is in alignment with these kinds of opportunities we're trying to create. I think it's a good time right now to maybe turn to the audience for a little bit and see the kinds of questions, comments that folks would like to share in this direction. I can barely see you with this light straight in my face, but I see a hand already up, and I can't really tell who it is.
I wanted to follow up on, excuse my voice, I wanted to follow up on the thoughts I had yesterday. I've traveled a lot, and I've been to a lot of different festivals. You go to a Native American festival, let's say up in Buffalo, or you go to an Afro-American festival in Brooklyn, or a Puerto Rican festival, or whatever it is, it's always a festival for those people. And to the comment that the question you were asking about Providence itself in the state of Rhode Island, I was sitting here while you were talking, looking at the marquee, and I was looking at all of the sponsors. And I haven't been to a festival where the indigenous community and the African American community and the art community were all coming together. It's a multicultural approach that Rhode Island's being taken here. If you just look at FANA, you know, you go from the Pokanoket in the south to the Uchi down in Georgia and out to Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. Most tribal festivals or powwows are driven by one ethnicity, one tribe. But I don't know if anybody's heard, but Africa's here. When's the last time the continent of Africa came outside of a slave ship? They're here to celebrate the fact that the indigenous community and the African American community are tied at the hip, as the nice Juneteenth lady was saying. That is something that Rhode Island and Providence have that nobody else has. And the ability to capitalize on it. You've got waterfront, as we saw in what we're going to see Saturday on the shots behind you. There's so much here to offer that there's a niche. And I'm just hoping that Providence and the state of Rhode Island actually come a little bit more forward in the future, because the opportunity to get all the continents together and celebrate what really is something unique to Providence. You know, you don't have the slave trade coming into LA. You really don't. It came here. You don't have the African American community running from enslavement to seek refuge with the Native Americans. I mean, there's such a shared, there's a commonality that doesn't exist. And this approach, if you look at the sponsors, we were just starting to talk about how Roger Williams University stepped up and gave the indigenous community an opportunity to have their own attorneys. That's a level of support that you see amongst the sponsors that you don't see in other places. There's a real commitment here. And I just wanted to direct this to you because you're going to carry the feedback. I think this thing has so much opportunity that it can grow to whatever you can conceive of. And it will grow, when we were talking about tourism yesterday as well, the possibility for expansion of a program like this, nobody else has it. And if you would carry that back to the state, I think this thing has an opportunity to make Rhode Island and Providence a place to go. Like, oh, it's almost time. Did I miss it? Okay, it becomes a calendar event that the kids look forward to. They get to come out to the water. They get to see art. They get to know, we're represented on Juneteenth. All of these things. And I just wanted to thank all of you for doing it. And I had no idea what this was going to be like. I just came because Two Hawks invited me. And it's fabulous. So thank all of you for the work that you've done, and I'm looking forward to seeing you. But if you would please tell the state and the city, let's do this again, I'd appreciate it.
We can count on it. Absolutely. This critical piece that the story and in the way that Providence is able to tell it can only happen here.
Yeah.
This is borrowing words from Ray Watson, that is really the goal here. That this is a story that needs to be told by us. And if you want to hear it from anywhere in the world, you would need to come here to actually get that story. Otherwise, you're just sort of getting a summary of it. And that could be another dimension to the tourism that can really enhance the current approach, which is more about niche and trying to figure out ways of attracting people. But if we can connect them to the story that needs to be heard, I really take that word to heart. I think I saw another person about to go.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Evie. I'm an intern for the Deed Department for the City of Providence. And my question is, do you think tourism has contributed to gentrification? And if so, how do you plan to use cultural placemaking to dismantle this?
I do. I think they contributed to gentrification because you see only certain events being sponsored and money being pushed that way, as well as marketing and promoting. But when we speak about cultural things that actually mean something to the communities that live here, because when you go any place, you want to know, well, why am I here? You know what I'm saying? So when you're here in Rhode Island, let me just give you, I live on the east side. I work on the east side. The east side has been gentrified. We own a piece of property. I go on the property to pick flowers. I'm told I'm not supposed to do that. It's my property in terms of the center that I run. So there's nothing really on the east side that tells the story about the people who were there before. So there needs to be things that this city, this state pushes. There's been so many studies done with Brown, I think Rick as well, about the history of Providence itself, the gentrification, the enslavement, the riots and all those things. So, but we don't push it outside of it being studied in a school. So when it comes to things that are actually cultural, we don't get the support we deserve. But when it's something non-cultural, they get the money, they get the marketing, they get the promotion, and they also make sure that the people who need to be there are there. And that's unfair. So they will continue to grow, continue to get the support, while we have to do it grassroots way, trying to find funding and utilizing all the resources, rather it's someone's art or someone's art, to benefit and tell our stories, and also to allow it to grow so that we can continue to have these events. I hope that answered your question.
Well, I think tourism, I mentioned earlier my concerns about tourism. I mean, I think we've seen some really wrenching testimonies from the Native Hawaiian people about the tourism just continuing right through the devastation of Maui. And there are the whole history of tourism goes back to religious pilgrimages, and before that to the Crusades. And people coming back from the Crusades, which were all colonialist power motivations, including the religious pilgrimages. So I'm very nervous about the energy and the motivations of tourism and it as an industry, which it is. And when we look at support for things, cultural events here, there's sort of two strands. One strand is telling the history, and it's more educational. and about engaging and providing voice for cultures. You were talking about nowhere on the East Side do we know about the original people. Nowhere in the city do we talk about the original people. I mean, it's not just the East Side, but you know, Brown's first study on its connection to slavery was published. A whole book on the subject was in 1952. You know, we're still not grappling with that. But the other aspect of tourism comes out of, say, departments of commerce, which is looking at, you know, economic spending by the tourists, and that as much as we celebrate Providence as this amazing place, that in itself drives gentrification. So many people moved here in the last few years from New York during the whole, the COVID challenge we've had. But the more we successfully talk about the diverse and success of Providence, the more gentrification happens. It's a really two-edged sword.
Thank you for your question, Ibi.
Yes, good morning, and many thanks to the organizers for a fantastic event. My name is Anele Wanyamu. I am an attorney in New York, originally from Nigeria. Just wanted to re-echo the sentiment that yes, Africa is here indeed. Thank you for this wonderful event.
Thank you very much. My name is Masata Stephen Kojosaki from Ghana. I'm well pleased to be part of this wonderful event. And such a wonderful event, would have wished that a lot of people from Africa are well represented. Unfortunately, when it comes to visa issues, we had a lot of challenges. And I will appeal to the organizers that if they can make an advance arrangement for people to participate in such wonderful events, because most of the stories can be told by people here, but we have the native from Africa who can really share the unadulterated stories, like poverty rights, which is being done by the provost. When you reach a point of marrying, how you are taken through some rights are so beautiful, and such things like we have Ampi, where people play together, men and women, and Ansotre, like there are some rich cultures that you might not find them in books. So when the people are here and then they tell the story, it resonates with the people. So I will entreat that you make such arrangements, and I also want to commend you for such a wonderful event. God bless you.
Thank you. We have a couple of people on this side as well. I'll add one quick thing, and then I think we're going to take just one more comment to wrap up. Just to elaborate on that, in terms of my department that's in City Hall right now, I want to make it very clear that it was not built by the city.
Right.
That was very much built by the community. The African American ambassadors completely own the right to say that they did that. In addition to building this department, it's brand new from January of last year. Also, the positions that were created, the fact that Rhode Island is no longer called Rhode Island and the Providence Plantations.
Right.
The removal of the Providence Plantations was by that group. The fact that we have just any kind of real advocacy for this kind of work really started with the community. So I just wanted to highlight that this is a win from our community that came together, leaders from different organizations, to make that kind of pressure actually bear fruits.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Masasi Casas Costa. This thing about gentrification is very, very super important. So I think that we gotta take that at the forefront from now on. Whatever they want to do, bring it to the community. Maybe FANA is going to be the one going to develop a plan, a system that everybody has to follow. I just came from celebrating 502 years from a message that came from our last spokesperson in Mexico, Cuauhtemoc. Okay, when he lifted the message that one day the sun would shine on us again. that one day the sun would look down and see dignified to return to us again. Well, they have just turned that sacred place into what they call a pueblo mágico, which means tourism. Already the rules came in, already the people are being moved out, already they're setting things up. In other words, when this designation comes to people, it doesn't always help the people who are there and been working on that forever. And to take our sacred place where we come from all over, wherever we're at, to come and celebrate his birth and also his murder of Cuauhtemoc. Now it's turned to Pueblo Mágico. So I think that there should be some rules set down.
Yes.
I think that before we take any steps of recognizing any kind of tourism that comes in there, it's got to be done by the people who live there, by the people who are there. So I'm going to call on Chief White, Chief Yanaguska, to think about that and maybe set up a plan that we can all sign on to that and say yes, when we want tourism, of course, it helps, but we don't want it at the expense of the reality and also the suffering that is there. One other thing too, I realized that as we're working with Chief White and trying to find out these sacred places, especially the burial ground and things like that, I was very kind of upset to see that on one side of a marker it said over here was a Indian burial ground, and over here was a slave cemetery. Okay, but I didn't see anything like we're sorry, we're very sorry this happened,
Yes.
and we're all responsible for that.
Yes.
So I believe that we got to be very conscious on that, and when we move forward, a lot of people who live in the areas, I remember Machu Picchu when it became a wonder of the world. All the people that were there were happy about that, but when it was over, the original people were not there no longer. They had new hotels, they had new stores and things like that. So in other words, let's set something up. When we leave this conference, let's set something up. But out of this conference, out of this gathering, this will come up. So, Tlaxcamati, there might be my phone. Tlaxcamati, thank you very much.
Fantastic dialogue. Round of applause for all of our panelists and our facilitators. And as yesterday, we can continue on in particular perspectives, but we do have an agenda, and I would be remiss as the coordinator and facilitator if I did not move us on. So thank you all, appreciate your time.